computer. All right, there's the record button. Okay. So yeah, welcome to another speaker series. Eventually, later this year, we'll do these in person at RPAC. Not quite sure when exactly we're getting back in person, but I mean, I don't see why September is remotely not possible. I think that's probably going to be where we land. But with the way that vaccinations are ramping up and it seems like things might get safer sooner, maybe we do a little bit earlier. We'll see what happens. Haven't yet been in touch with RPAC to find out what their rules are, but I do know that they're available now to rent for 50 people or less. They've gotten that approval from the state. So, which is the first time that's been the case in about a year for them. So we will be back in person at some point soon, relatively soon. In the meantime, we're just going to keep on keeping on. For those of you who aren't paying attention, the next meeting is this upcoming Tuesday is the next critique meeting. And if you're not familiar with what the challenge was this month, the challenge was pretty simple. It was flowers. So if you were at the Studley's workshop a couple weeks ago, hopefully you have your flower photos. If not, hopefully you're able to buy a bouquet at the grocery store, or maybe you have some early lilies or something popping up. Yeah, so get those to us through the Gmail like usual, one per person, and we will go through critique on Tuesday night, like old times. The next challenge, in case you can't make it here Tuesday, I'll let you know what the next challenge is. The next challenge is, not surprisingly, Symmetry. Take what you learned today, go out and use it. Keep in mind too that the summer show this year in July, which is the show that gets hung at Riverstones, that is also Symmetry. So Ella's sort of kicking off our summer Symmetry program today. And so we're going to have Ella today. The next challenge is Symmetry. And that should give you enough time to get some critique back on your images and a chance to also get them printed and framed and whatever you want to do with them for the actual show. As far as any details about the show, hanging fees, things like that, that still hasn't been worked out yet, but I have confirmed with Chris that we have Riverstones for the month of July like normal. So we'll be hanging sometime the end of June. And then if we're able to have a reception for opening this year, then we'll figure that out. Or maybe Tanya will be so nice to just let us use her side lawn and we'll do something outside and at least get everybody together around the show. I know that Jared and Jacob are working on a waterfalls outing. We're keeping an eye on water levels and hoping that we're able to get you guys out to shoot some long exposures on the waterfalls. Not exactly sure when and where that will be, but they're working on it. So that's probably upcoming soon. I'm working on a scavenger hunt, which will probably take place in Portsmouth over the summer, which will be a teams. We'll break everybody up into teams and we'll go out and do a scavenger hunt. And if you've never done one of those, a photography scavenger hunt, they're a lot of fun. There's really no pressure about being artistic. Just go out and get the shots and enjoy the day and spend some time together, which I think we could all use at this point. Another thing I'm also working on is as we're getting closer to, now we're definitely into spring, I'll be reaching out to the Dragway again. So if you've missed the last two Dragway workshops, I don't see why we won't be able to do another one, but that will probably be in the fall. So that information will be coming as well. Jacob, am I missing anything? I don't have my notes up in front of me because I'm, well prepared.
I don't think so. Maybe those that haven't renewed their membership dues yet. I don't know if you wanted to cover that. I know I haven't.
Yeah, so membership technically does expire at the end of the month. So if you want to get on to the website and just renew for next year, anytime is fine. We're also not, I'm not going to go through the camera club. I'm not going to go through the Facebook page and just start deleting people on June 1st or May 1st, I mean. So, been trying to remind people as we go, but, just try and get it done sometime soon. If you feel like we've met our $35 threshold, we'd love to have you back. Some of you already have, so I thank you, those who have. And some of you, I know, just probably this is not front of mind most of the time. So yeah, I think that's probably it. I'll go back through the notes from the last leadership meeting, and if there's anything that should be covered, I'll cover it at the end, or at least get some information out to you guys if there's anything else that we forgot to tell you. But I think for housekeeping, that's about all I have. So I guess without further ado, I'll let Ella sort of introduce herself. I don't know all of her background, but I do know her work, and I'm constantly amazed by it. So I can't think of a better person to present on this topic. So Ella, the floor is yours. And I saw you were already testing the share screen, so it looks like that's working. So
I was. Thank you. Thank you.
you.
Thank you for inviting me. This is exciting. I haven't done a talk on Symmetry before, and as Sean knows, I use it a lot, but this is the first time I really kind of had to sit down and analyze why Symmetry is so important in so many aspects of composition. So, you know, this is going to be an adventure for all of us. My name's Ella Carlson. I'm from Littleton, Massachusetts right now. Sean and I met up at NHPPA, New Hampshire Professional Photographers Association, and I've been a member of that since 2004 or 5. I can't remember exactly which year, I think 4, and learned a ton through PPA. So you see I've got a ton of initials there. I collect them. It doesn't really mean all that much, but you know, it keeps me busy, gives me something to do. So without further ado, let's talk about Symmetry. Let's see, there we go. Whoops, let me back that up just a minute. And as I said, this is a talk about Symmetry. And one of the things I look forward to is having your feedback. So feel free to unmute yourselves or to use the chat window. If Sean, you can keep an eye on that because I probably won't be seeing it as people put things in, but feel free to stop me and ask questions anytime. I am a teacher. I teach at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. I've been teaching there since 1999, so 22 years this summer is my anniversary there. I teach photographic imaging, which is a combination of Photoshop and graphic design, a little bit of web design, a little bit of marketing, and all that kind of stuff all put together into this class. And then I also teach the advanced version of that. So I'm used to having students interrupt me, ask me questions. It doesn't bother me a bit. I look forward to it. So my first question is, let's see, how does this make you feel? Looking at that title slide, think about it for a minute. And I'm going to go back to it and let you look again and ask you again, how does this make you feel? Anybody got an answer for that? I'll go ahead because I'm sure you're all just shy. If you're like me, it makes you feel uncomfortable and you want to correct it. Shelley, yes, I knew you were going to say that, right? Yeah, you're going, what the heck are we going to learn from this crazy woman, right? I want to fix it when I see something like that. And that's a really interesting reaction because why? Why do we want to fix it? Think about this one. I mean, this one's a little bit more symmetrical. We've got things going on here, but still, you've got a different font injected in here and you've got something else going on. Anybody else kind of put a name to why this isn't working symmetrically other than the font choices?
Colors.
What was that?
Colors.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Yes, colors. The color on the right is muted, it's subdued. The color on the left is in your face, bright, saturated. So we've got two different kinds of color here, not only kinds, but two different, completely different colors as well. So this one, the colors are harmonic, they work together, they're kind of in the same range as far as saturation goes. We've brought the font together, so this works a whole lot better. So that's much more what we think of when we think of symmetry and balance. And the two go together very, very much. They work together side by side as two components of really the whole point of composition. So why are we so programmed to appreciate symmetry though? That's a really interesting question. And that was kind of what I came to. One of the reasons is biology. Think about what asymmetrical features can mean way back when, not talking about this century or the last century or even this last millennium. What do asymmetrical features mean when you're talking about really, really early man? Got an answer? Okay. What it can mean is, number one, it can mean health. It can mean you're healthy. It can mean that if you're a primitive man or a primitive woman, you haven't been injured. Therefore, you're stronger than maybe your compadres. You are somebody who hasn't been beaten by someone else and scarred up or having things happen to your face. You haven't got a birth defect that affects your features. You haven't had a stroke, which can affect your features. All of those various things that can indicate that you aren't in as good a health as other people, those are indicators that led to people being more careful about who they wanted to breed with in the very, very primitive sense. So that's one issue that kind of seeps through all the way from the very beginning of time right to where we are now. Psychology is another issue that is at the base of our love of symmetry. When we see symmetry, we associate it with various feelings such as peacefulness, calm, stability, harmony, or grounding, especially in bilateral symmetry where the two sides are the same. Such designs remind us of geometry and the aesthetics of classicism, the old art that you see from early times. Think of those perfectly symmetrical European gardens and palaces. Images with symmetrical balance tend to create feelings of order, tradition, classicism, formality, and constancy. And in a world, especially a world 100 years and more ago, those were things people really sought out. Now we have people that seek the opposite because our lives are much more calm, ordered, and controlled. But back then, you have to think about the fact that a lot of them were farmers or hunters, and if they didn't have stability, they didn't have food. If they didn't have a stable source of their food supply, then they were starving. So part of the psychology of symmetry is the fact that it feels good, it feels safe, it feels familiar. Perfect symmetry satisfies the mind that loves precision and stability. It can sometimes look static and artificial and boring though. So that's the subtle difference, is you have to really appreciate when to use symmetry and when to break it up a little bit. If you have subtle differences between the two sides, that can really add a lot to your symmetry. And it just adds so much more interest. Also, the human face, while we are built symmetrically, almost no one has a perfectly symmetrical face. So we are built with a little forgiveness in there as well. This is one of my symmetrical creatures other than the arms. And, when you look at it, you instantly identify as something that's living because the two sides match each other, just like us. Okay, ink blots, Rorschach's ink blots. Those are symmetrical basically because he took a piece of paper, folded them, and that's what the ink blots came out. But why? Why did he use symmetrical ink blots? Anybody have an idea? Okay, this is one of his cue cards. This card is meant to determine a person's subconscious paranoia level about the feelings of body image. If someone sees a bat, butterfly, moth, or female figure, they're said to be normal, average, and there's no problem indicated. If the person sees jack-o'-lantern, mask, or face of an animal, then their response may indicate a sense of paranoia. And if they see something negative about the female physique, then they've got women problems. So notice the words he's using and how he gets the person who's looking at that ink blot to engage with it. If it were random, he would not be having anybody see a bat, butterfly, moth, or female figure, because all of those are bilateral figures. So it's very intentional that his ink blots are symmetrical. So look at this one. What do you see here? I looked at it and saw a guy holding a jackhammer. That's me. And you're shooting up from his feet upwards towards his head, so his head's smaller. A friend of mine had another version of this, not so polite, but it was still a male figure. So that's very intentional that Rorschach's ink blots are symmetrical, because then we connect to it as another bilateral figure that we can somehow identify, human or not. Bat and butterflies are not human, but somehow we still connect with that. So what did you see? And even more interestingly, why did you see it? And that's what the Rorschach ink blots are all about. Symmetry can feel comforting, organized, tidy, stable, and restful. How do we make use of these attributes of symmetry in our lives? So we're going to go to those European gardens. Look at, this is like a classic British European garden. Could be French, could be British, I don't know. But it's symmetrical and it's restful. And you walk out there and it's a break from all of the whatever mayhems in your life, whatever battles are going on outside, whatever political subversion you have to deal with as the king of the castle, wherever this garden is. All of this is built to bring us right back to those feelings of comfort, organization, stability, tidiness, and restfulness. So we've got all of that built in as part of the reason for these gardens being symmetrical. So think about what that means in terms of photography as well. You know, when you take an image and you make it perfectly symmetrical, you're imbuing it with those characteristics. So just a couple more gardens here. And I wonder how they get into trim in this one. How do they get in there to trim those centerpieces with all of those hedges completely enclosing it? Interesting question. A very nearly symmetrical castle built that way because it's home. It's somebody's comfort. It's somebody's stability. So build it as a symmetrical entity. Japanese gardens, their symmetry is a little less rigorous a lot of times, but still you see him going around the center of this and he has the bush on either side and then he's raking it out. It's going to be symmetrical, at least part of it. This is a feature from a Japanese sand garden. Again, symmetrical. And this has much less identifiability as symmetrical, but there's a lot of symmetricality in it. You notice the green with the projectile coming up is balanced by the other side, having the green around it with a projectile coming up. And then you have that kind of bouncing back and forth between the two sides happening all over the place. So very, very interesting, the difference between the European version of symmetry and the the Japanese version of symmetry. I was taking a peek at the chat there just to make sure no one had a question. And what does that lead us to? Even our own little fire pit things that we have in the backyard sometimes. We usually build those around some kind of symmetry. In this case, you can clearly see the symmetry. In this case as well, the symmetry happens. Why? Because it's comforting. It brings us in and connects us to each other. So that's another reason that symmetry is so important to us. Familiarity. I've said this already in a number of different ways, that it's familiar to be symmetrical because we are symmetrical. What else is symmetrical? Our pets. Our pets are symmetrical. Regardless of cat, dog, rodent, whatever you've got, even a tarantula is going to be symmetrical. People are symmetrical. Men, women, children, babies, we're all symmetrical. And even our houses oftentimes are built on a symmetrical model. So all of those things are familiar to us, and it's very purposeful. Sometimes, very often, you'll see a room set up like this, where there's symmetry within the room as well. Why? Because it's comforting, it's home, it's stability, it's restful. So that's why we're looking at it. If you look at pictures of fireplaces, how often do you see a non-symmetrical fireplace? It's so rare. I can think of the one in Beetlejuice, the movie, that kind of morphs into this like zigzaggy fireplace, but I don't really see too many of the fireplaces that are not symmetrical. It leads to orderliness and tidiness. That's one of the reasons that you'll see when you get a wedding invitation, 99.9% of the time, everything's centered. All right. And when it's not centered, it can look untidy. So my little cartoon buddy here to remind you. This is the invitation for Kate and William's wedding. Symmetrical, center alignment, making it symmetrical. The Zakim Bridge, look at the symmetry there from this side. But then if you go under it, it's symmetrical that way too. You've got a lane on each side for the incoming, outgoing traffic. You've got the bridge span going on either side of the road. You've got those big, huge columns, and those, everything in it and about it is symmetrical. So it's familiar. And again, houses, traditionally, especially like 100 years, 150 years ago, very often were built on a symmetrical foundation and maybe had things added to one side or the other. But the familiarity, the comfort, the steadiness, the tidiness, structures like this tower, symmetrical for the same reason. And our sneaky little brains are looking all the time for symmetry. We seek it out. We ask to see it subconsciously, not consciously, but we're all the time looking for it in art, in photography, in architecture, in each other. So what is symmetry? Let's talk for a minute about its actual definition. It's visual quality of repeating parts of an image across an axis, along a path, or around a center. So symmetry sometimes, symmetry involves a close or exact correspondence between opposite halves of an image. On the facing sides of an axis or a center, one half appears to be a mirror image of the other. That's bilateral symmetry, where it's exactly the same. It can be across the vertical plane, the horizontal plane, or it can be, there's a number of other ways. It can be radial symmetry as well. So this is a snowflake, close up of a snowflake, and we see the symmetry within nature itself. Symmetry is also when the elements of an art piece balance each other out. This could be the objects themselves, but it could also relate to the colors and the compositional techniques. So if you look at Dali's elephants, it's a very symmetrical painting, but it's not completely symmetrical. There are little differences in the color, the depth of the color. There's little differences in the legs. He's got his signature on the upper right-hand corner. He's got that little house or whatever it is, just slightly to the left of center. And then there's a couple of people there as well. So all of it is symmetrical in idea, but then there are these little details that kind of bring it out of symmetry and make it just a little more interesting. Frida Kahlo's self-portrait. You see, her face is extremely symmetrical, but then she just brings other things a little bit off of symmetry, like the monkey and the cat they're symmetrical in the fact that she has a black animal on either shoulder and a white butterfly on either side of her hair, but they're slightly different, which adds a little bit more interest to it and makes the viewer kind of wonder what's going on here, brings the viewer in for a closer look. This is a painting by John Constable in 1821. And if you notice, his symmetry is much more subtle, but he's got a tree on either side balancing out. He's got a smaller tree on the left. He's got the big, huge building right next to that, and balancing that out. He could have cropped that out. He could have left it out, but it wouldn't have the same feeling. It wouldn't feel balanced at that point. So he's using that tree on the right to balance this out and create an uneven, but very, very visually satisfying symmetry. Symmetrical balance is achieved by giving equal weight to elements across the center point of the composition, just like you saw with the last painting. The center point can be horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, and the result is, if it's mirrored, it's perfect symmetry. If it's not, it can be balanced. And the easiest way to have it perfectly balanced is to mirror part of the image, or mirror the image from one side to the other. There's Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical sketch, man, and that is very, very symmetrical because we are symmetrical. So another snowflake on a mitten, two snowflakes actually, and both are very beautiful, very symmetrical. Symmetry is everywhere, even in music. So I've got this little movie to show you. I won't show you the whole thing, but I'll just show you a couple minutes. But watch the patterns that the music makes. This is actually music making patterns in various forms of liquid, sand, etc. And watch what happens with the patterns.
The film you are about to see has no characters. If you spare a little of your imagination, it is a film to describe to you the effect of cymatic frequencies on matter.
Interesting, right? The music actually makes the material turn into a symmetrical composition. So what are the kinds of symmetry? Let's talk about that just a little bit. Vertical symmetry. We know this because that's what our faces are. That's what our bodies are. If we're lucky, we're vertically similar on either side. We have one side that matches very closely to the other side. So that's mirrored symmetry, and you'll see it in photography, you'll see it in each other, you'll see it in our pets, et cetera, et cetera. We see it in butterflies, obviously, all kinds of things in nature. Again, we see it in each other. We see it in architecture and even architectural details because it's pleasing. We see it in invitations, any kind of formal invitation. And I spend a good deal of time trying to get my intro students not to design everything center aligned, because that's their natural inclination. They want it to look pretty and neat and organized and tidy, so they center it. And while I appreciate center alignment and it works for so many things, my job as a teacher is to get them out of that habit of thinking everything needs to be center aligned. Because not only is it neat and tidy and stable, it can be boring. It can be very predictable. So doing a different kind of alignment really, really kind of opens them up to exploring other ways of designing things. Horizontal symmetry. You'll see this most often, top to bottom symmetry in like water reflections or mirrors, or when somebody puts something on a mirrored surface or a surface that reflects, that you'll see, like this, like a cityscape on a horizon. That's horizontal symmetry. And you notice they've got little HLS and VLS hand shortcuts for that. Not necessary, but I just thought I'd throw them in there. Diagonal symmetry, where the line goes from corner to corner rather than the top middle to bottom middle or left to right. It goes from one corner to the other. So there's an example of diagonal symmetry on two planes. You can see it's divided right between the top left and bottom right by the red dots. It's also divided the other way by the darker blue and the lighter blue, and you have that kind of symmetry as well. So diagonal symmetry is a little more difficult and interesting in a lot of ways than just plain vertical symmetry. This is also diagonal symmetry. So we have this stadium shot where you've got the red seats. And another example of diagonal symmetry, where the building and the corner detail being the dividing line between those two planes. So remember to turn your camera a little bit here and there, and something that looks fairly ordinary could kind of come to life when you're using diagonal symmetry, or even the other kinds of symmetry. Radial symmetry, round and round we go. This is a composition by Alice Miniter, one of my NHPPA friends and fellow photographer. And this is a leaf that she photographed and then inverted and got those details and then stepped and repeated it. So this is a Photoshop technique. I think there's a lot of little applications that will do the same thing at this point. So you don't even have to get into Photoshop to do this kind of thing anymore. A lime slice. Beautiful symmetry, beautiful radial symmetry in this. I think this is gorgeous. I didn't do this. This is really beautiful though. Makes me want to photograph something like that. Doesn't it make you want to slice up a lemon or a lime or a kiwi fruit or some kind of beautiful, delicious fruit and photograph it, put the light behind it? Absolutely. A fern, shooting down into a fern. And our snowflakes, again, radial symmetry. And then there's rotational symmetry, which is the last kind I'll really talk about. And that is fractal symmetry, basically, where you start with a shape and it repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and grows a little bit bigger or smaller every time. So we think of, especially like shells like this, that's a very, very specific and recognizable example of fractal symmetry. A peacock's tail is fractally symmetrical. So you start in the center, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes out, more spaced out. Hens and chickens, radial symmetry in each of these. And even the ice crystals that form on a window are fractally symmetrical because they start out and then they repeat and repeat and repeat with each crystal that forms with the ice that as it freezes on your window. So it's really cool to kind of look at some of those things. And you don't have to wait for winter, although we just had a little taste of it. You can stick something in your freezer, put a piece of glass in your freezer and freeze a little bit of water or vapor there and see what happens. See what happens when you photograph it. Music can have symmetry as well. Listen. The Pachelbel canon. Do you hear the fractal symmetry in that? It starts with a fairly small piece and keeps adding to it each time it goes around, and has this beautiful fractal symmetry, which is why we love it, why you hear it at weddings, why you hear it in movies. It attracts us, it comforts us, it makes us feel homey or familiar. It's just got that wonderful sense of symmetry in it. It doesn't always have to look like you've used a mirror. This is a painting by Turner, William Turner, who's probably one of, if you want to look at a painter who knows how to handle light, I would say look at William Turner's paintings. He's from the 1800s. He had a really wild, what do you call it? Like, and a painting rivalry going with John Constable, who I showed you one of his paintings earlier. And they had this crazy thing going. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But look at the symmetry here. We have on both sides, we have the dark, then we go into a light area, then we come into a dark area and center it with a light area. We have a little bit of detail in that white area on the left that kind of comes forward. And then we have the sail ships and the smaller flag to balance that on the right. So think about his thought process in bringing all this together. He has symmetrical elements in this, using symmetrical lights and darks rather than making a mirror image of it. So this is symmetry as well. It's just not mirror symmetry, but it's symmetry of the lights and darks. In Escher's image right here, you'll see an awful lot of symmetry in Escher's work. This is perceived symmetry, where the weight of the elements line up symmetrically. So you see the weight of the fish lining up as an opposite to the weight of the birds on the top. You see the fish's head weighted about the same as the fish's tail, each one of those kind of balancing each other out. You see the light on the top background and the dark on the bottom background working balancing each other out. So it's a really, really interesting look at how Escher uses symmetry as well. That's MC Escher. If you're not familiar with him, he didn't consider himself an artist, and yet he is one of the most respected and amazing illusionist artists ever going. And he did these really cool things where you'd go upstairs and then the stairs would just turn into something else. Look up his work if you aren't already familiar with it. MC Escher, Escher. And again, he's an old timer. He's from 100 years ago or more. Really, really cool, beautifully detailed imagery that's most of it is done with pen and paper, or they're some kind of prints, but really interesting artist. I found this as a sample of Japanese art they made this out of dandelion puffs. Can you imagine? How do you clean it? I mean, this is an artwork, symmetrical artwork, and it's much bigger than this, but I've just brought in a detail here. Each detail is symmetrical, and then the whole big expanse of it is symmetrical, and it's made out of dandelion puffs. Absolutely amazing. Another Escher print, and again, using symmetry, but not mirrored symmetry. Everything kind of works together and balances each other off and repeats. And it's a really interesting take on symmetry there. Our playing cards, when you play with a deck of cards, did you ever wonder why they're symmetrical? It's so you play more card games. So, well, first of all, you don't have to worry about what's up, what's down, because they're symmetrical top to bottom. If you flip it, it looks the same. But also, then you have the whole idea that, yes, it's something familiar. We're associating the familiarity of the symmetry with things that are so common to us. This is an extremely favorite piece when you're talking about symmetry. The Last Supper by Da Vinci uses a lot of subtle symmetry and not so subtle symmetry. The background is very straightforwardly symmetrical. We've got these lines coming into the center, leading you right into the center of the image, right into Jesus. You've got the table, which is symmetrically built. You've got Jesus he's sitting right in the center of the composition, and you've got two groups of three people on either side of them, either side of him. But did you notice too? Look at the colors. He has one person on either side of him that's in kind of an orange or rust. He's got people on either side of him with blue. So he's got one large area of blue right to the right of him and a large area of blue to the left of him. He's got a small area of blue right out at the very tip of the left side, and the cuffs of the person third from him on the right is blue. All of those colors, if you look at it, everything is repeated from right to left. Even the direction that people are looking is symmetrical in one sense, at least, because you've got the three people on the right looking towards him, and the three people three people on the left looking towards him from the far distance, three people on the right from the near distance, all looking at him. And then the other true groups of three are looking at each other and discussing. So all of that is symmetrical too. None of that's an accident. All of it is very, very intentional to bring you right into Jesus and tell you that's the story. Everything else is to make you feel like you want to look at this a long time. Even the colors of Jesus' robe, he's got the blue on one side, the orange on another side, but if you look right behind him, there's the blue again. So even that's symmetrical. So really doesn't look symmetrical at first sight, really, except for the background, but everything in it is talking about symmetry. So why are we drawn to symmetry? Evolution, we talked about that. Evolution, we want to marry the healthiest people. We want to marry the people with the most power. We want to marry the prettiest people. And in most cultures, the most symmetrical people are considered the most beautiful people. Facial structure and body structure is one indicator, if it's symmetrical, of good health and good genetic material for the future. There's my caveman. Okay, symmetrically is comfortable and it's balanced. That's why my beginner students are so inclined to center justify everything. They want the balance and they're comfortable with it. They've seen it before. They know they've had a wedding invitation sitting on their counter or whatever. They know centered justified is a valid way to design something. So that 90% of them start off center justifying everything. And I have to kind of nudge them to get them away from that. Symmetry is familiar. Again, it's what we see in the mirror every day. And it's not just humans. And it's also one of the landmarks used to measure beauty. And that can no doubt be traced right back to our earliest ancestors. I also want to talk about the fact that it's innate in us. It's not a learned behavior. When psychologists test babies as early as 4 months, they will look at something that's symmetrical longer then they look at something which is not symmetrical. Their attention will go to that symmetrical piece and stay there longer. It increases as a child gets older, and it's really cemented as we're adults, that we look at things longer if they're symmetrical. So think about what that means as a photographer. Do you want your audience tuning out, your viewers to stop looking? No, you want them to stay with your image and look at it and get into it and really appreciate it. And one way is to use symmetry. So bring it back to that. It's something that we really look for. This was like 20 years ago. Angelina Jolie was once voted to have the most symmetrical face. So now she's breaking it up with the earring there, but she has very symmetrical features, and she's one of the most beautiful people, or has been chosen as one of the most beautiful people in the world. A little too skinny right now, but she's very symmetrical. Supermodels are generally very symmetrically shaped faces, and their features are very symmetrical. Kim Kardashian, she's also got a very symmetrical face, and was, I think this is the most recent version of who's the most beautifully symmetrical person. She's one of them. What happens when the face isn't very symmetrical? What does that have? What happens when it's not symmetrical? Aha. Character actors, a lot of character actors have very asymmetrical faces. Mason Reese, former child star. There's not much symmetry in that face. He's kind of all mushed up on one side and kind of all flopping down on the other side. Not symmetrical, yet he was a character actor as a child. He still acts a little bit as an adult. DJ Qualls, funny, skinny guy, very non-symmetrical face, another character actor. This guy, Michael Berryman, another character actor. Look how asymmetrical his face is. I mean, even his ears are not even symmetrical. And this guy, we all have seen this guy in a million things. I think this is from Ghost, this picture. Vincent Schiavelli, another character actor, and he made a living by not being very symmetrical. So we find the very asymmetrical people are very often character actors, because those are not the guys that you usually want to cast as your romantic lead. Almost no one, though, has a perfectly symmetrical face. This is a really interesting experiment. You can do it with yourself. Just take a selfie in flat lighting. You want the lighting to be as even as possible. So you can stand in front of a window, or, if you've got lights, or like Sean said, he's got the strip light that he used that just burned out because his battery's dead. You can use those to evenly light your face. Take one half of your face and flip it and copy it to the other side of the image. And that's what this is. So we've got on the very left, that's her actual face. In the middle is the left side of her face, our left, her right side of her face, flipped and repeated. On the other side, on the right side, that's the right side of her face, flipped and repeated. And look how different she looks in each one of those. Here's another example. Again, left side is her actual face. The other two are flipped, mirrored images of each side of her face, and how different each side of her face looks. Now, if you're like me, you look and you go, well, yeah, her hair's different because that's parted to one side. So I took a picture of Jennifer Lawrence and did it and put her hair over. So her hair was pretty much the same in each of these, but even her, and she's gorgeous, beautiful, considered a sex symbol and a movie star, definitely a movie star. And she has one side of her face, which is markedly wider than the other side of her face. So it's a really, really interesting experiment to do that with yourself or a family member or a pet. Try it. It's really kind of interesting. As we age, our faces often grow less symmetrical. That's the truth of it. And what's the reason behind that? Well, disease, scars, just wear and tear. You may smile a little bit differently. You may smile with a little bit of a lopsided grin, and that's going to contract the muscles on one side of your face more than the other. So all of those things can change your face over time. So this is Brad Pitt younger, very, very symmetrical face. As he's grown into his 50s, his face is less symmetrical. You know, one eye's a little squintier than the other. Still gorgeous, but just that little bit of a difference happening as he ages. So really interesting to think about why that happens and what that kind of means to us. As photographers, we want to make people look their very best. So we use certain techniques when we take a portrait of somebody to make their face look more symmetrical. If someone has one eye larger than the other, then you position them so that the smaller eye is closer to you, and then have them look off to one side or the other, and that makes the smaller eye look a bit larger. Or you can go into Photoshop and liquefy the eyes a bit now, but that's if you are in Photoshop and want to do it. If one side of your face is smaller than the other, which means it's closed versus open, it's the terminology as photographers we use, you may want to light the closed side of the face more to make it look bigger, because light stuff looks bigger. It grabs the attention. So that's we all know that as women, when we gain weight, what's the first thing we do? We buy darker clothes to hide. We make ourselves look smaller by wearing darker clothes. And coincidentally, usually the open side of the face tends to be considered more attractive. The side that's a little bit bigger, the side with the eye a little bit more open, that's usually considered to be more attractive. Symmetry, yes, is comfortable, familiar, and attractive to us as human beings, but it's also attractive because it represents balance. Now think about losing your balance. It's an extremely uncomfortable thing to be. You want to catch your balance if you're losing it. Well, it's the same thing with visual balance. You want that balance to be there because it's a way into the story of the image and it feels good. So it's one of the reasons, symmetry is one of the reasons you'll see logos like McDonald's have a symmetrical logo. You know, their base logo doesn't even have the bevel and emboss on it. It's just the arch, which is a mirror image. And why? Because they want people to think of them as comfortable, homey, safe, stable. So they're making all of those into their logo. They're putting all those values into their logo. Volkswagen, it's the family wagon. That's what Volks in German means, people wagon. So they wanted to be comfortable, so they made a symmetrical logo. They also had, VW is just perfectly made to make a symmetrical logo as well. Starbucks, we want to feel like Starbucks is a place we want to go and hang out and use their internet and have their coffee and have another coffee. So symmetrical logo for Starbucks. And Airbnb, a perfect example. You want people that are going to someplace strange to stay for a night to feel comfortable and safe. And what better way to make people think that this is comfortable and safe than to have a symmetrical logo. Symmetry can also be the epitome of elegance. And that's why, again, you see it in formal invitations. This looks so beautiful and elegant when you see something so symmetrical like this. All those lovely textures and the lighting. The rose window, symmetrical, elegant, gorgeous. It's why people spend crazy amounts of money in big, huge houses to make staircases that mirror each other, because it looks beautiful and elegant and it brings you into the house, invites you in. This is just a cross section of a shallot. And how gorgeous and elegant and beautiful is that? I mean, just absolutely stunning. And it's symmetrical in the color, the way the color comes out, it's symmetrical, but just a little bit off symmetrical, just enough to give us some interest. So that's, you've got a myriad of products in your refrigerator that you could photograph for your symmetry project that's coming up. This is an enclosure for an invitation. Beautiful and elegant. Okay. And this is why I tell my students, don't center justify everything, because if you use symmetry completely as your way to go, it can get very staid, boring, and predictable. In short, it can be a big fat yawn. So, it depends on what you're using it for. So this reminds me of when I worked for an engineering company as a graphic designer. These used to drive me crazy because they're so boring as to actually make me yawn. But they do this kind of thing all the time. This is a snore. It's just not that interesting. So what happens when you break symmetry? It's a lot more interesting and fun. What's going to happen here? What happens when that little guy finally cracks through that support strut? It's starting to tell a story. Before, we didn't really have a story. We had two things that look the same. They're sitting on a scale. They weigh the same. Here we've got something that's happening a little bit different. We've got a story. Here's broken symmetry as well. You have that beautiful pattern, the symmetrical pattern, but then you have this little departure that makes it that much more interesting and that much more compelling. And you start to build a story around that. And stories are crucial to photography. He is a sex symbol, a big, huge movie star. And look at his face, though, very asymmetrical. He's got the right side, camera right side of his face is much more closed than the left side of his face. There's a bigger difference between the corner of his mouth in the left side and his eye than there is on the right side of the corner of his mouth and his eye. See that? And look which side of his face is lit. The photographer knew what they were doing. They lit the closed side of his face to make the face appear more even, although because we're looking for symmetry, we're seeing that it isn't. But if you just looked at that without thinking about symmetry, you would say that person has a very symmetrical face, or he's gorgeous. You wouldn't worry about all the symmetry. Breaking symmetry can add personality. I do this when I create my aliens, and that's kind of what I'm known for at this point, is creating these crazy creatures. And in this one's made from a car bumper. And I added all kinds of things to it and made the cigarette and put the smoke in. But by adding the cigarette, the smoke, and giving him a sneer off to one side with his mouth, it adds personality. It doesn't look like it is, let me go back. It doesn't look like it's just sitting there like a mugshot. It has an attitude. This one, just by lifting one ear, making the ears look a little bit different, adds a whole different realm of personality into this little guy that I created. Just a tilt of the head can add personality. Now, if her head was straight up and down, it would look like a mugshot. But by adding the hair on one side and then tilting her head a little bit, it's starting to have some personality. You can start to build in your mind a little bit of a story here. So that's one of the reasons when I create my creatures, which are all created symmetrically to begin with, I will almost always tilt a head or add some sort of a feature in there. A flower can be very symmetrical, can be very fractal. And in this case, I added a green leaf to it to add another color and kind of break up that symmetry and add a little more interest. Even a slight lift of an eyebrow can convey a certain change of attitude. I've been playing with caricatures lately, and this is Marissa Bellotti-Lavoie, who's a very talented photographer and a social media genius. And she allowed me to do a few caricatures of her. So I'm taking advantage and using those today. But a little quirk of the eyebrow brings in a little more attitude. What's the difference for eyebrows were exactly the same? She'd be standing there thinking, take my picture in my mind. This way, she's standing there and she's got attitude. This girl has got it going on. What if we tilt her head a little bit? That can convey friendliness and openness just by breaking that symmetry a little bit with a head tilt. And add an asymmetrical expression, and that's where you get to Sassy, which is her brand. She is the queen of sass, and she is great at it. She's built a whole brand around it and a whole business around it. By breaking the symmetry, we have brought the sass back to Marissa. So, and you don't see that when she's just standing straight on. At the heart of symmetry is balance. Balance is a compositional technique in photography that juxtaposes images within a frame so that the objects are of equal visual weight. And that's important. Equal visual weight is important. When different parts of the photo command your attention equally, perfect balance is achieved. And the surefire way to do that is through symmetry, of course. So something like this works beautifully. But if you notice, there's a little purple light on the far left that isn't there on the far right. Oops, sorry. And that is breaking up just a little bit that symmetry. There are lights on the right that aren't on the left. So it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it is very symmetrical. This one's very symmetrical as well. Beautiful, beautiful concept by this photographer. And the man standing there almost centered, but not quite. This is a photograph by Man Ray, quite old, but look at the symmetry there. He's got the hair coming down. He's got the part in the hair to define the line of symmetry, the axis of symmetry. He's got her outfit is perfectly symmetrical as he could make it. And he's just taking advantage of this symmetry in a beautiful and dramatic way. But the lighting isn't quite symmetrical, which is what keeps it from being boring, static. Near symmetry can work really, really well. Georgia O'Keeffe used it a ton, and you'll see it over and over and over again in her paintings. That's another one of hers. See, it's nearly symmetrical, but not quite. So this is a cow skull in red, white, and blue. And the background, very symmetrical. The colors, very symmetrical. The lights to darks, very symmetrical. But then the skull itself, not totally symmetrical. That gives it a little more visual interest. And the symmetry brings you in. The little difference in symmetry keeps you there to go, oh, yeah, look at that. There's part of the jaw on the right missing. How interesting. I love this example of symmetry in Dali's painting. This is Salvador Dali's encaustic still life. And look at that. He's got beautiful symmetry from right to left in that he's got a fish on the right, a fish on the left, a roll on the right, a roll on the left, and then another fish that's breaking the center axis with his body shape. But he's gone from negative to positive in that he's gone light on the left side, dark on the right side, and even the shadow of the bread, it's dark on the left side, and then there's kind of a glow behind it on the right side. So this is very symmetrical in concept, and yet it's opposite in lights and darks, creating that balance. Really, really interesting piece to kind of look at and evaluate. Japanese art, a lot of Japanese art is very symmetrical in the sense that you have something happening on one side and repeated on the other side, oftentimes flipped too. So let's talk about a few concepts to use in creating better compositions when you're thinking about symmetry. Color is one thing. The intensity of the color. You saw that way back at the first slide where the intensity of the color, the saturation in the color made things look non-symmetrical. And just by bringing in the similar intensity of color, it's balanced it out. The color didn't have to be exactly the same, but having it be the same intensity of color made it feel much more balanced. And there's another example of Turner's color symmetry, where he's coming in and balancing light area to dark area to that pinkish red area to the center, almost the center where it starts to become the place that divides it and folds it in half. You think of folding something in half. Even the amount of detail on the right is echoed by the amount of detail on the left. So all of that, Turner is thinking about symmetry. Light versus shadow is another thing to think about when you're thinking about balance and symmetry. And we talked about this one before. This is the light versus dark versus light versus dark all the way across this composition, and how symmetrical it is in his use of light and dark. Balanced texture. If you have a textured area in an image, it tends to feel more weighty than an untextured area. And in this case, the textured area on the left feels much more weighty than the textured area on the right, because we can see more of the texture. The texture is much more marked, much more defined between the heavy darks and the lights, and much less defined on the right. But look at what the artist did to balance it out. They added in the little I don't even know what you call it, the little cue cards up there in the top right. And the moon is over there on the right. And all those little hieroglyphics, the Japanese writing is on the right. So he's balanced this out, even though the left side calls our attention more strongly because of the really overt texture there. He's balancing it out by adding in those little signatures on the right as well. Visual weight. Light areas tend to attract our attention more strongly. So look at this Van Gogh piece. You've got that really dense, heavy area on the lower left, and then you're balancing it with the sunburst on the upper right. So you've got that balance going back and forth between this piece, Van Gogh's Starry Night, where the lighter areas are put up higher and the darker areas are positioned lower. The darker area is bigger, but the lighter area is brighter. So it all balances each other out, and it's kind of bisected in the middle by that church steeple. So really interesting use of Van Gogh's Starry Night to talk about symmetrical balancing weight in an image. And then subject placement. We know about the PowerPoints. You all know about the rule of thirds, or the golden mean, where putting something 1/3 of the way into your image approximately from either corner is going to be a better position than in the center a lot of times. So in this case, this is my Hannibal Teddy. He's centered, so he's on that 1/3 line right down the middle of him, and then balanced out by the extra space and the brightness of that skull on the left side. So this, by the way, was, I'll show you a little movie about how he was made in a little bit. Symmetry is part of balance, of course, and the most straightforward way to create balance. So this is the cover of the Beatles' Hard Day's Night. And notice they've got right in the center, they've got that point to call you in there. There's 4 of them, so they couldn't make it an odd number. But across, they've got 5 pictures of each one of them. And if you notice, each one of them has their hands positioned in at least one of the frames. Each one of them is lit from the same side. There's all kinds of balancing going on here and symmetry going on there. Sushi. Sushi chefs are known for being artistic in the way they put things together. So even sushi can be balanced like that, can be very symmetrical, and it adds to the beauty and the simplicity and the comfort of the food that they're serving. Depth of field, you can use depth of field to create balance. So in this case, I've got the detail of the dragonfly sketch towards the right, and then balanced by a bigger open out of focus area on the left. And negative space. Negative space is very important to creating balance a lot of times. So light areas tend to attract our attention more strongly again, and a smaller subject placed in opposition to a large negative space will create a certain amount of tension and often amplify the artist's concept. So in this piece, this one's called Windswept. All of that space to the left, I left that on purpose because I wanted it to feel like the wind was blowing this dead, desiccated almost flower towards that space. So I gave it room in which to kind of blow. So that tells you something different. And I judged an image just a week ago, yesterday, that would have been perfect for this slide, but as a judge, I can't know who the maker is, so I can't contact anybody to use it. But it was a veteran who was down in the lower right corner, very small, and then all this big space around him. And the point of it was him feeling so small, so hopeless, so absolutely distraught, and it came across so well, that use of negative space. Working with symmetry is a great basis for self-challenge, and I'm really glad, as Sean pointed out, that you guys have that challenge coming up, because it's awesome to go out and kind of figure out, where can I find symmetry? You know, look for symmetry. What are the different ways that you can find it? Architecture, huge place to find symmetry. I mean, there's tons of symmetrical buildings, but not only just buildings. If you go to Boston or Chicago, you'll see buildings that have walls of glass that work like mirrors. So you can get one building mirrored in another building, and that creates architectural symmetry. Nature, we've already talked about nature. Almost every living creature is symmetrical. There are a few exceptions. Sponges are not symmetrical. And then there's a few crustaceans, I think, that are not built around a symmetrical model. Faces obviously are symmetrical. Body positioning, our bodies are symmetrical. Reflections in water and in windows and mirrors. Reflections in sunglasses and shiny cars. And don't be afraid of offsetting the axis of reflection rather than centering it. A lot of times that's going to be more interesting. Be open to all kinds of symmetry. This is, I love this one because it's got the light, dark, light, dark, light, dark going across the top and then again on the bottom, but it's reversed, because where the sun comes through, the beam that's light above, it creates a shadow, makes it dark. Where the sun comes through and it's dark above is creating a shadow. So it's kind of the opposite thing going on there, where you've got the top is mirroring the bottom, but it's also a negative version of the bottom. This is up-down versus symmetry. Manga comics, a lot of times, manga comics very often will use symmetry in their comics. So you see the figure on the right is upside down and darker, and then the figure on the left is right side up and lighter. And the figure on the right versus left creates upside down symmetry. Try creating your own symmetry. You don't have to use Photoshop or Photoshop Elements even. There's a lot of little apps that you can find that will allow you to do some image flipping. You know, take a portion of an image and flip it, but it's super easy to do in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. In this case, I started out, the antlers there started out as the sand on the beach in York, Maine. And all that was just cut out, and then I mirrored it and made the little creature below. This creature started out as a wasp nest. So I took pieces of the wasp nest and made his horns. I took the main part of the wasp nest, made the head, and then again, pieces and made the body, and then filled out the rest of it with the hair and the moon there behind him. This piece started as a photograph of the glass atrium roof in the Grand Opry Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. Big, huge atrium roof. And I took a photograph of it and mirrored it and then built this little girl off of that. And this was made from 2 wine glasses. And again, the creature himself is perfectly symmetrical. His little snarly tail there is the only thing that departs from the perfect symmetry of, this is Buggy and Whip. This was one of the things that led me into my Alien series. And I did a tea series, a huge series of tea, flowering tea, iced tea. And I mirrored them all and used polar coordinates to make them circular. So I made all these planets. And what happened, just like Rochart's ink blots, is that I started seeing faces, I started seeing bodies. And as I look at this, I saw a little body in there, a little space guy. Everybody sees something different. It's very much like the Rochart ink blot tests, because everybody sees something different in the things that I did during this time. But I started seeing features of faces and bodies, and then I just enhanced those and pulled things out and evolved from there. But you can do that stuff fairly easily. This is how Hannibal Teddy was made, and that's the Teddy I showed you earlier. And so I'm just going to show you, it's only a minute and a half. I'll show you this one. The skeleton was in a museum in Germany. This is an escalator going down to the subway in Washington, D.C. And this is the goblet that I put on its side and used the reflections to put catch lights in the eye that looked more real than if I had built catch lights from scratch. So we actually started with the glasses. I wanted to make the glasses. I made them first, and then I brought in the escalator and started playing with how to make the body. And that was really, really, really tedious, because if you look back at the escalator picture or remember it, there were a lot of lights that weren't quite lined up. You can see them here. There's a lot of little splotches of light that would be distracting if I left them that way. So I had to clean a lot of that stuff up. You still see it right here. And work to make his feet. And I wanted this one side lit. So he's not perfectly symmetrical like a lot of my other ones. He is side lit. But I just took those pieces over and over again and built his little body parts out of them. And at the end, added in the skeleton, because his working title was Creepy Teddy. And then a friend said, he looks like Hannibal to me. So that's why he ended up naming him Hannibal Teddy. And this is another one that started as a symmetrical offshoot of the tea series. And this started from the bubbles in the top of a glass teapot. So you'll see the beginning in a minute, I believe. There we go. Bubbles in the top of the glass teapot with the starting image. I was playing with how to make eyes from scratch, and talk about symmetry. Our eyes are eyeballs. They call them that for a reason. They're circular. Everything in them is circular and symmetrical. So it's really, really not hard to make an eyeball from scratch. It's pretty interesting and easy. And I've just kind of taken that idea and run with it. But you see, I build one side of the face and then I'll copy it and flip it over to the other side. So I don't have to build two eyes from the whole way, build both sides of the face. When I flipped it, I found these little keyholes and just repeated elements to make the beak. But that kind of led me to the story of this one, which was this owl who, the name of it's Who's Got the Key. So I brought in a key, photographed that, kept adding a lot of fur. I have some good friends that if I'm interested in getting some feedback from an image, I'll send it to them and they'll go, you haven't done enough, do more. So I made the legs longer after one of those feedback sessions and put this little guy. This was when I was first doing fur and hair. So I was really kind of playing and experimenting with that idea as well here. Okay, a huge variety of options for what you can do with the idea of symmetry. Look at mandalas. And I have a friend, Gail Hiley, and I don't have her work in here because I just didn't get in touch with her fast enough, but she makes beautiful, beautiful mandalas. And if anybody's interested, you can email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat. And I'll send you to her website and you can look at her mandalas. This one's made out of paper. And you can see it's just photographed, but it's three-dimensional, made out of paper. But you can do the same thing digitally quite nicely. Okay. That one again is created digitally. So that's a digital mandala. But there's all kinds of really beautiful, amazing mandalas. And you've got in Photoshop and probably Elements too. It's been a long time since I used Elements, but in Photoshop and Elements, I believe too, you can actually create patterns now where it'll repeat and almost automatically make a mandala. Reflections, get out that piece of glass or mirror and photograph stuff, put something on it, put a glass of wine on it. This is just a glass of water that we were my friend Allison Miniter and I were playing with water splashes one day in her studio. Obviously, water reflections. This is one of the preserved plantations down near Charleston, which is one of my husband's and my favorite places to visit because it is heaven if you love to eat. And it's heaven if you love gardens and go anytime between March and September or October. You can see this has got a little subtle kind of reflection in it, but it balances it. There's another mirrored reflection with water. Water is a great tool for making reflections. Again, a little different take on it. I really like this. I thought it was a pretty original take to have these people walking in that little spit of sand and then have water on either side. Architecture, huge opportunity there for finding symmetry. Taj Mahal, haven't been there, scoff this from the internet, but look at how symmetrical that building is. This guy wanted his wife, who he built this for, had this all built to be comfortable, tidy. He wanted this to be the epitome of elegance for her. This is a little old house down in North Carolina, I believe, or Virginia. We were doing a road trip and stopped in Wilmington, some place in Wilmington, something down there. I don't know, we just stopped overnight, so. But symmetry on the building. This is a plantation, mansion right outside of Asheville, North Carolina. But look at that, the driveway goes up one side, down the other, beautiful symmetry on either side with the trees. The house itself isn't quite symmetrical, but the elements in it balance each other out so beautifully. The Library of Congress, a beautiful example of symmetrical building. And this is a church. Again, symmetry. Nature, it's all around us. Flowers, this is the mum. Simple chrysanthemum. Amaryllis, the flower, two blossoms that bloomed at the same time and just breaking up that symmetry with those leaves at the bottom. Two dead lilies, just photograph them and put them against each other so they balance each other out. And this is a daisy. So just symmetry, it's everywhere you look. And these were gardens. This is my husband's picture. Took these gardens and they're all built symmetrically. Faces and bodies, obviously. This is an instance where I took this girl's face and flipped it. So one side of her face and the other side are exact copies of each other. I think I took the camera left side of her face and flipped it to the right, but I broke up the symmetry by having the halo cocked a little bit, giving her a black eye and sticking a feather in the other side of her mouth. So it makes it more interesting, although her face is perfectly symmetrical, it makes it more interesting to break up that symmetry just a bit. The symmetry brings you in, the breaking of the symmetry keeps you there a little bit longer to appreciate what else is in there. Symmetry in the arms and the face and the body, the legs break up the symmetry just a little bit in this one. The body, the front of the body, the head, the antenna, all of that's perfectly symmetrical. And then we just add in the hands and the back of the body to break it up a little bit. I just had to throw this one in because I found it, but this is actually my son before he was born, my first child, and he was breech and 9 pounds, 13 ounces. So there's my son breaking up my symmetry and just demanding to be born by cesarean section. Create your own symmetry. It's not hard. Like I said, there's little apps that will take things and mirror things. And this is, I use Photoshop here, but it's basically taking a section of the image of a tea, flowering tea in a teapot and turning it over on its side and using polar coordinates. These were all part of the tea project, but you see what I mean about seeing things in here? I mean, you can interpret those little areas on the outside as ears, some kind of flowery ears, or that could be a bat or some kind of little bug in the middle. All kinds of things can happen, which kind of led to my making some of my early aliens and my later aliens. This is photographing smoke. I put smoke on a black background, light's 45-degree behind it. And I showed my friend who is, like you, a member of a camera club out in Albuquerque, how to do this with two very inexpensive flashes on his not high-end camera at all. And he had a blast doing stuff like that. Incense sticks make great smoke. And it's really good to have a second person to swish the smoke around to get more interesting patterns. And now it's time for questions. We just hit 90 minutes on the button pretty much. So let me know if you've got questions. And I have been blabbing away here and nobody's interrupted. So yeah, Deb, you saw our face in one of the Rorschach ink blots. Yeah, pretty cool. Hey, Pat, how are you? Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to stop sharing.
Hi, Ella. I'm good.
Good, good.
I'm so glad I made it. This is wonderful.
Thank you. I hope it's inspirational.
Well, I'm actually working on a piece now that I've, been struggling with symmetry here and there, and just your encouraging of breaking it up is like got me all excited. So
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
yeah,
I
fun.
see beautiful, perfectly symmetrical pieces, but most of the time, just a little break somewhere there adds personality, dimension, and story to it.
Yeah.
And that's when we're looking at competition for PPA, Professional Photographers of America, which I'm a member of and an approved juror for. Storytelling is one of the things we look for. So what's the story? And that's so important in really bringing the viewer in and connecting them to your work. So feel free to unmute yourselves and comment or ask questions or tell me you're tired of listening to my voice and you want to go do something else, whatever you like.
Never.
I don't think that's the case.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So, and I am relieved it came out at 90 minutes because it's the first time I've done it. So I had no idea if I was going to be long or short or whatever. So right on the money here.
What are you using for a camera?
Right now I have an Olympus and I just traded my Nikon D800 and all those lenses in for the Olympus. I had my shoulder replaced a year and 4 months ago. So weight is a big factor for me. So I went mirrorless finally and just slimmed down my whole camera pack into a couple of lenses in the Olympus mirrorless. So
Nice, very nice.
but I also I've made my aliens out of iPhone pictures. I've made my aliens out of iPhone pictures from a friend 10 years ago, very, very low resolution. So there's all kinds of ways to use any imagery or any way that you can collect the images. So, and a lot of my shooting, most of my aliens are made from very, very ordinary kind of things like textures, the escalator going down to the Washington Monument. I've got one alien that's looks like a royal kind of alien cat, and that's made from a burnt piece of wood with water on it. So, I use all kinds of things to make my creatures. So,
Now, obviously, you don't go into something like this and saying, I'm going out looking for aliens today. Something must hit you at that point in time that says, this will make a perfect alien.
yeah,
Sure.
well, I collect textures. I collect a couple of things. I collect skies. Anytime I see a cool sky, I'll collect the sky because always there's a million times you have a gorgeous subject and then the sky is like white, just white or boring or just really not good. And now we've got that beautiful sky replacement in Photoshop that works really automatically. So you can bring in your own skies and use that. But I collect skies and I used to put them in by hand before regular. And I collect textures. So those, and I collect inspirational pieces. So if I see something online that I really think, wow, that's really cool, and I want to try something they're doing, I'll put it in my inspiration folder. And if I run short, if I'm not inspired or I want to work on something new, I'll go through that and go, there's something I'd like to figure out how they did that. And I'll sit down and kind of go through it and try and pull apart the technique they used. So I do go out purposely and shoot textures, and a lot of the textures I use are what my aliens are made of. And then I self-challenge a lot too. Like one of my aliens, let me come in and share screen again, desktop, boom. And I don't need that. Let's see. My website is ellaprints.com, so it's really easy to remember. And I'm the worst self-marketer in the world, so there we go. Okay, so that one's built out of my husband's size 14 feet and a glass of iced tea. And that I was bored during a wedding that I was at, and so I made that as kind of a self-challenge. This one was also a self-challenge. That's called Crown Royal on the Rocks. And I wanted to build an alien out of water or something transparent. So what I did was I shot some, I'll show you how this one came about actually. Crown Royal on the rocks.mp4. Let's see. Whoa, you just disappeared. Oh, doesn't like that today. Oh, I know what's going on. There we go. Awfully quiet in here. There we go. So I was at a gallery and saw those votive candle holders and went, oh, that's really cool. So I took pictures with my iPhone, and that's how he started. I didn't have my regular camera with me because I was at an opening. I had a show with 2 other artists up there in their gallery in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, which is a really nice gallery, by the way. If you've got work that's ready for a show, the Wren Gallery, W-R-E-N Gallery up in Bethlehem, New Hampshire is a really nice gallery, and they love showing local artists, meaning New Hampshire artists. And the reason I got onto their radar is I got my MFA at New Hampshire Institute of Art before it was bought up by NEC. So you can see I used those splashes from the splash day with Allison and a couple of my friends. These are all the layers, just so you can see all the stuff that went into it. And then this is mirroring and using polar coordinates to kind of build the chin, the snout of the dog. I made the eyes, used the splashes. But like I said, I went into this with that challenge to myself to make something that looked transparent. So again, symmetry, which I'm sure is why Sean thought of me for this topic, is because all my aliens start out symmetrically. Even right here, I'm still very symmetrical, but building his hands out of the splashes even, and keep going. And I don't want to hang you guys up. Oh, it's pretty close. So then I started to break symmetry using posing, changing the position of the arms, using puppet warp, for instance. I don't use much stock photography at all. This is like one of the very few times I used a stock photograph, but I don't have a goldfish, so I wanted goldfish to mirror and be symmetrical to the color in his eyes. So the eyes are the same color as the goldfish, or reminiscent. So that was Crown Royal on the Rocks, and those are images that went into it. And he's got a slight tip to his head. So that is how I kind of work. So
Very nice.
thank you. Cool. Other questions?
I love that. Just means you did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you've got my email if you have questions that you think of later. I type really fast, so don't hesitate to say hello. And it's a pleasure to talk to you guys.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ella.
Thank you, Ella.
You're welcome.
Honestly,
You're
it was
welcome.
fantastic.
Yes, thank you. That was really nice.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. I really appreciated being able to look at other art through the years, to be able to, catch symmetry and stuff and be inspired. So I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it's
Love
really,
your work.
thank you. Really interesting what you can learn when you start looking critically at
Mhm.
paintings or sculpture or any, don't just look at photography. If you want to be inspired, look at all of the different art forms, because
Right.
there's so much inspiration out there.
Mhm.
Yeah, art is art, so it's like,
Absolutely.
and sort of, you know, what's beautiful to us is the same regardless of paintings, photography, sculpture, all of that stuff. So
Absolutely.
cars are very beautiful.
Cars are gorgeous. Yeah, my brother-in-law, who passed away 2 years ago, this spring, had an absolutely amazing collection of antique cars. And my son and I photographed the cars, and my son videotaped him talking about the stories of how he came by these cars, which ranged in age from 100 years old to, I think the latest car was in the 50s. Had an Indianapolis 500 winner, among other things, but I couldn't use any of those cars in anything I was doing or social media because he was afraid of theft, you know, because they're so valuable. So that's one of the cars grills that made the round guy with the one eye smoking a cigarette. That was one of his cars. I could use him if I really disguised him. So. So, okay, thank you very much, guys.
All right,
Thank you
thank
very
you,
much.
Ella.
Thank you, Ella.
Goodbye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Ella.
Bye.
You're very
Thanks,
welcome.
Sean.
Bye,
Bye, Ella.
Pat.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
So hopefully that was helpful. I
Sean,
know
that was-
I
Thank you for
thought,
doing this.
yeah, I mean, I don't think I've thought about symmetry in all those different ways, you know, so it was really helpful to me. So now go out and shoot, go find some cool stuff. Play around in Photoshop, create an image.
Bottle of bourbon
There you go.
There you go.
on the rocks.
Honestly, a lot of bottle photography, like advertising, is done with that mirroring technique.
Sure.
And then they'll just sort of mask out the label. But that way it's completely symmetrical and the bubbles all match. And yeah, that's actually a technique that's used a lot in advertising, not surprisingly.
Cool.
Nice tip.
So, all right, guys, I hope to see you Tuesday. We have our flower presentation. Ella, I'll be in touch. I need whatever your email is for PayPal or however you want to be paid for this.
Okay, great.
And I had another question for you, but we can do that through email or whatever.
Okay.
It's not related to this, so.
Okay. Take
Okay,
care.
I'll see you guys Tuesday.
All right,
See you
thanks, guys.
Tuesday.
Bye, guys.
Bye now.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest
Bye.
of the
Thank you,
weekend.
Everybody be
Ella.
safe.
You're welcome.